Nobody tells you that empathy can be a wound dressed up as a gift. Jung knew. He spent his entire career watching people quietly destroy themselves in service of who their parents needed them to be. And he kept coming back to the same thing. The people who were the most giving, the most attuned, the most willing to pour themselves out for everyone around them, they weren't born that way. They were made that way. By necessity. By fear. By love that came with conditions so fine print, so invisible, you didn't even know you were fulfilling them until you were 35 and exhausted and couldn't explain why. He called what they buried the shadow. And he said, if you don't face it, it will run your entire life from underground. Quietly. Efficiently. Without your permission. What he was really saying is this. The most empathic person in the room is almost always the most frightened child in the room. Just older now. Better dressed. Better at hiding it. So let's talk about how it actually starts. Because it doesn't start with someone sitting a child down and saying, you are not allowed to have needs. It's never that obvious. It's never that clean. It starts with something much smaller. A look. A shift in the room's energy. A parent who isn't dangerous exactly, but is fragile, or unpredictable, or just sad. Deeply, quietly sad in a way that a small child can feel but doesn't have words for yet. And the child looks around and thinks, without ever actually thinking it, my job is to fix this. My job is to make sure this person is okay. Because if they're not okay, nothing is okay. And nothing being okay is the scariest thing I can imagine. So they start paying attention. Not because they're naturally gifted, because they have to. Because reading the room isn't a personality trait at that point. It's a survival strategy. They learn to feel the shift in the air before anyone speaks. They learn to be whatever the room needs them to be. Funny when things are tense. Quiet when someone's overwhelmed. Mature. Agreeable. Helpful. Good. Always so good. And everyone around them looks at this child and says, what a gift. So intuitive, so caring, so wise beyond their years. Nobody stops to ask what it cost them to get there. Jung had a name for the version of yourself you build for other people. He called it the persona, the mask. And he wasn't saying personas are evil or fake. He was saying they're a deal you make. You build this version of yourself that the world will accept, that keeps people around, that keeps things safe. And then you live in it so long you forget it's a mask. You start thinking it's just who you are. The kid who learned to put everyone else first grows into an adult who genuinely believes they don't have needs. Not that they're suppressing them, that they literally don't have them. Or that having them is shameful. Or that asking for something is the same thing as being a burden. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because what got buried, what had to get buried for the mask to work, wasn't something bad. It wasn't cruelty or greed or anything like that. It was just wanting things. Normal things. Space. Rest. The ability to say no without a 3-paragraph explanation. The ability to be in a bad mood without immediately managing how that affects everyone else in the room. The ability to need something and not feel guilty about it before the sentence is even finished. That's what got buried. The permission to take up space. Jung called everything we bury the shadow. And he was very specific about something. He said, the shadow doesn't disappear just because you stop looking at it. It goes underground, and it starts controlling things from there. It leaks out sideways. In the relationships you choose, in the patterns you repeat, in that specific kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep. It's about years of performing a version of yourself that was never the whole truth. So what does that look like in an adult? What does it actually look like? It looks like someone who is incredibly good at showing up for other people and completely terrible at letting other people show up for them. It looks like someone who will sit with you through the worst night of your life and then go home and not tell a single person that they're falling apart. It looks like someone who says, "I'm fine," so reflexively that they've lost the ability to check if it's true. It looks like someone who, when they finally do express a need, apologizes for it in the same breath. Like the need and the apology have to come as a package deal, or the need isn't allowed to exist at all. It looks like someone who has given so much for so long, but they don't even know what they want anymore. Not because they're indecisive, because wanting things was never safe. And somewhere along the way, their nervous system just stopped generating the signal. Now, here's the part Jung was really warning about, and this is the part people skip over because it's uncomfortable. He said that whatever you refuse to integrate in yourself doesn't just sit quietly, it finds someone to project it onto. The person who was never allowed to be selfish doesn't stop having selfish impulses. No one does. That's just human. They just can't own those impulses, can't acknowledge them. So they see them everywhere else instead. They become hyper-aware of selfishness in other people, allergic to it. They attract people who are openly, unapologetically selfish and then spend years trying to manage them, fix them, love them into being different. You see where this is going. The empath who can't acknowledge their own needs ends up in a cycle with people who have no problem acknowledging theirs. And it looks like love from the outside. It is not love. It is two people's unresolved childhoods finding each other in a parking lot. And the word selfish, let's actually talk about that word for a second, because it's doing a lot of damage. Selfish got weaponized. Somewhere along the way, in certain families, certain churches, certain cultural scripts, selfish became the worst thing a person could be. More specifically, it became the worst thing a child could be. Because a child who advocates for themselves, who pushes back, who says, "This isn't working for me," is harder to manage. And some adults, consciously or not, need children who are easy to manage. So selfish became the thing you called a child who had inconvenient needs. And that child, if they were sensitive enough, if they were paying close enough attention, they heard it. They filed it away. They thought, okay, needs equal bad. My needs equal selfish. Selfish equals losing love. And they spent the next 20, 30, 40 years trying to prove they weren't that. Jung's warning wasn't that empaths are weak. It was almost the opposite of that. He was saying, look at how much energy it takes to maintain this. Look at how much of a person's life gets spent in service of a wound they've never even named. The sensitivity is real, the care is real, but underneath it, driving it more than most of them would like to admit, is a terrified kid who learned that being needed was the only guaranteed way to not be left. That's not empathy at its purest. That's empathy as a survival mechanism. And there's a difference, a real one. And the difference matters, because one is something you do from fullness, and the other is something you do from fear. And from the outside, they look identical. From the inside, they feel completely different. One leaves you tired but okay. The other leaves you hollow and still giving, because stopping
feels like dying. So what does Jung say to do about it?
Not in the academic version, in the actual human version. He says, you have to go down and get it. The thing you buried, the wanting, the anger you were never allowed to have, the grief of being a child who had to be the adult, the completely reasonable, completely human desire to sometimes be the one who is held instead of the one who does all the holding. You have to go get it, and you have to bring it back into yourself. Not perform it for anyone. Not suddenly become someone who treats people badly and calls it healing. That's not what integration means. It means you stop pretending the need isn't there. You stop apologizing for it before it's even out of your mouth. You let yourself, maybe for the first time, be a whole person. Shadows included. That is what he called individuation. And he believed it was the entire point. Not becoming the mask, becoming the whole thing underneath it. I need you to hear something before this ends. If you have been the person everyone leans on for as long as you can remember, if asking for help feels foreign in your body, like a language you understand but can't speak, if you cancel your own needs so automatically that sometimes you genuinely don't know what you feel until you're alone and finally safe enough to feel anything. You weren't born like that. Someone taught you that being loved required making yourself easy, manageable, small, and you were a child and you believed them because you had to, because it worked, because it kept things okay enough to get through. But you're not a child anymore. And the version of love that required you to disappear to receive it, that was never love. That was a transaction. And you paid too much for too long and got back nowhere near enough. Jung's warning isn't dark. It's actually the most hopeful thing he ever said. Because he's telling you the thing you buried isn't gone. It's been waiting. It kept itself alive underground all this time. The need, the want, the voice that knows what you actually feel before you edit it for the room. It's still there, and it's been waiting for you to finally stop calling it selfish and start calling it yours.